leads you to murder people, that's pretty bad. If your racism leads you to avoid people, that's not as bad. And I'm not saying that you should avoid people. I think everyone should live together in peace and harmony. Okay, I think everyone should love each other. But you can't tell me that murdering people is exactly the same as avoiding them. It is not. And what the progressives will tell you is if you're avoiding people today, tomorrow you're going to be shoving them in the gas chambers. And the evidence for that is why it's non-existent. There's no evidence for that. And the obvious allusion is to the Nazi regime, but the Nazi regime did not get progressively more anti-Semitic. Hitler and the Nazi regime was just the extension of Hitler's personal opinions. Hitler was every bit as anti-Semitic in the 1920s as he was in the 1940s. He just hadn't developed the mechanisms to murder all these people in the 1920s, okay? The ideology was exactly the same, we were just waiting for the mechanisms to come along. So anyhow, it's not the worst thing. It depends, what you do with it. And if the worst thing you can do is murder people, then the worst ideology in the history of the world is probably communism, because it murdered more people than anything else. And if murdering people is the worst you can do, then the worst ideology today is probably Islam, which murders far more people than racist murder. And it's worth noting that both communism and Islam believe in universality. That is to say, they believe that race doesn't matter. That all you have to do you just have to be on our side. Okay, if you join Islam, they don't care what race you are. If you join the communists, they don't care what race you are. So it's just interesting that that actually turns out to be worse. The third thing is that racism is a unitary thing. And again, this is something progressives love to say. They love to say that it's all the same. If you haven't personally torn down a Confederate statue with your own bare hands, you're just as bad as the slave owners.
As Nathan Bedford Forrest.
That's right. It's all the same thing. We're all together in this. You're not on our side, so we just lump you all together. And I actually think that there are 3 different types of racism. Okay? And they're all bad. I'm not in favor of any of them. But they're different. And we don't get smarter by failing to acknowledge obvious differences that are there. The first difference, the first type of racism is what the left likes to call all racism, and that is hate. And the way I like to term it is ethnic grievance. Ethnic grievance racism is where you believe that your group has been victimized in the past by that group, okay? That's what Nazism was. It was based on ethnic grievance, okay? That they thought, I'm not saying that they're right, but their belief was, because their belief is what matters, their belief was, look what the Jews did to us, they stabbed us in the back, oh my gosh, we got to get even with them. So that's one type of racism. The second type of racism is condescension, which again is not good. You shouldn't condescend to people, but it's not the same as ethnic grievance. It's different. The racism of Robert E. Lee was condescension. He did not hate black people. And I got to tell you, the average slave owner in the South did not hate black people. They were merely condescending to them, which is not good. I'm against it. But it's a difference. They thought that black people weren't as good as that. Whereas the Nazis, that's ethnic grievance. The Nazis didn't say, oh, those poor Jews are just inferior to us. They're not as smart as us. We gotta help them along because they can't possibly make it on their own. That is not what the Nazis were saying. They were saying, we're mad at them because we have this grievance against them. And the reason why it's so important to understand this difference is that in their effort to fight against the condescension form of racism, the left encourages ethnic grievance. This is what people of color, particularly black people in the United States today, are taught, is that you are a victim. Okay? And the problem with encouraging ethnic grievance is it brings out the real bad kind of racism. When you feel this, it's when you actually do start shoving people in the gas chamber, because they deserve it because of what they did to us. Okay? And that's a huge problem with the entire left-wing model in this. They think they're making things better by telling one group that you're a victim of the other group, and they're actually sowing the whirlwind. Because it's that, and by the way, the same thing happened in the blacks in the South. You know, lynchings did not happen in the time of slavery. Okay, lynchings came after the Civil War, when the same way that the anti-Semitism happened in Nazi Germany, which is to say that when the North won the Civil War, they freed the slaves, and the northern soldiers who were occupying the South didn't trust the southern whites who had been shooting at them a week ago, so they trusted the blacks because we just freed them. So they put the blacks in charge. Okay? Now, if you imagine that you've been a slaveholder your whole life, okay, and someone comes along and first of all frees your slaves, and second of all puts them in charge of you, you're going to have some resentments. And again, it's not because slavery is okay. Slavery is a horrible, terrible thing. I wish it had never happened. Slavery is just god-awfully bad. But you know, you have an obvious reaction that's going to happen there, and so you scapegoat somebody, and they scapegoated the innocent blacks of the South, just like the Nazis scapegoated the Jews because they were mad about losing World War I. And forgive me for going into a little more detail on this, but if you want to understand what causes the really dangerous ethnic grievance kind of hatred, it always happens when a group thinks they're on top and then get laid low. The Germans in World War I thought they were the most powerful country in the world, and their country's propaganda was better than their military power, and so up until almost the end of World War I, they thought they were winning World War I. And then, like, suddenly the German radio said, "Oh, we just surrendered." Okay, and everyone was like, "What are you talking about? We were winning yesterday. You told us." And so that's okay. And the same thing with the white Southerners. Okay, when you flip people like that, that's when they look for a scapegoat, and you start getting this ethnic grievance thing going. Okay, so anyhow, so there's three. Oh, the third type of racism I'm going to say for the end, but the third type is tribalism. And they're all totally different. We'll revisit tribalism at the end. Okay. The fourth issue, and this is something the left tends to equivocate about, and I'll tell you why, is whether there are actual differences between the races. Because part of what the left likes to say is we're all the same and everyone's the same, and if results are not the same, then something's wrong. Okay? There was a study that came out in Britain, and I'll point out this was a conservative government they've got in Britain, theoretically. There was a study that came out that said it was just horrible and terrible that different racial groups had different results in British society. That whether you're rich or poor, whether you went to college or not, whether you were the victim of crime or not, depended on what race you were. And that the non-whites got the short end of the stick, and everything is horrible and terrible. They now, by the way, have an equalities minister in the British government, whose job it is to make everything equal. So, on the one hand, the left likes to say that everybody's the same. On the other hand, they also like to talk about diversity, that we're all different. And when the Supreme Court said that you could not have different standards for different racial groups, which is what affirmative action is, but you can try to create diversity in your school, the left, the academic left, jumped on this and said, that's it, it's all about diversity. We're not trying to favor one group over another group.
The Bakke case.
We just want diversity.
The Bakke case.
Because it's so important for people to experience other types of people when they go to college. So now we are different. I mean, what their position is that we're all different, but the results have to be exactly the same. You can have differences, but no different results, which frankly is preposterous.